Douglas, thank you. Today, child murderer Kevin Underwood will be put to death. Underwood raped and murdered his 10-year-old neighbor, Jamie Rose Bolin, in Purcell in 2006. He admitted killing the girl as part of a cannibalistic fantasy, but there was no evidence any cannibalism took place. Her body was found in Underwood's apartment. This comes after last Friday's clemency hearing, where Kevin Underwood made a final plea for mercy to the Pardon and Parole Board.
The clock read 10:14 a.m. when his heart stopped. It was his birthday. 6 days to Christmas. Behind the glass, no one clapped. No one cried. The air inside the death chamber felt heavier than stone. One life ending could not balance what he had taken 18 years ago. He called it a cruel act. The family called it justice delayed. But the truth, the real truth, was hiding inside a plastic tub sealed with layers of duct tape, waiting for someone brave enough to open it. Nobody knew that when the FBI stopped an old truck on a quiet Oklahoma road, they were seconds away from uncovering the darkest secret the small town of Purcell had ever held. A neighbor everyone thought was harmless, a little girl who trusted too easily, and a story so twisted it made even the detectives stop breathing. To understand why a birthday became an execution date, you have to go back. Back to the door a 10-year-old girl walked through and never walked out again. Before the crime scene, before the headlines, before the plastic tub sealed with tape, there was a girl named Jamie Rose Bolin. She was 10 years old, small for her age, with freckles that showed up brighter whenever she laughed. And she laughed a lot. Her laugh wasn't quiet or polite. It was wild and real, the kind that made adults look up from their phones and smile without meaning to. She loved books more than anything. She read while brushing her teeth, while walking to the bus stop, even while her father, Curtis, called her for dinner. Her teachers called her the girl who finished every book before anyone else had turned the page. Her father just called her his sunshine. Jaime wasn't rich. Her family didn't have a big house or fancy things. They had what mattered: a roof, a routine, and love that didn't need to be loud. She lived with her father in a plain apartment in Purcell, Oklahoma. A town so small, the loudest sound at night was the hum of air conditioners. Her father worked hard, sometimes too hard, leaving early and coming home late. That meant Jaime had hours to herself after school. For most parents, that would sound dangerous. For Curtis, it sounded like trust. And for Jaime, it was freedom. She was the kind of child who liked proving she could handle things. She made her own breakfast, packed her own backpack, locked the door behind her. She knew how to keep herself safe, or at least she thought she did. In those quiet after-school hours, Jaime would pour herself a glass of iced milk, always in the same mug, always with too many cubes. She said the milk tasted better that way. That mug would still be there later, under someone else's bed, like a ghost of a routine the world didn't deserve to destroy. She played checkers with her dad every night he came home on time. He always lost, mostly because she cheated and laughed when he pretended not to notice. The red and black pieces were scratched from years of games. After she was gone, that same board stayed on the table, frozen mid-game, as if the next move might bring her back. Jaime wasn't a quiet child. She sang at random moments, danced when no one asked her to, told jokes that made sense only to her. She was part of the local Girl Scout troop, proudly wearing the green sash covered with badges she'd earned for camping, reading and helping neighbors. Her favorite badge wasn't for anything big. It was the one for being kind to animals. That mattered to her. Her weekends were her treasures. The coming Easter weekend was supposed to be special. Her mother, a truck driver often gone for weeks, had promised to come home. They planned to dye eggs and hunt for them in the yard, the way they did before work, and distance split the family. Jaime had been counting the days. Her backpack already held the pink dye she wanted to use this time. Because pink eggs make everything prettier, she told her dad. She didn't know that she'd never see that weekend. Everything about Jaime set alive. Her hair was always slightly messy, her shoelaces never matched, and her notebooks were full of doodles of stars, dogs, and names of people she liked. She didn't know danger. She didn't know that evil could wear a neighbor's smile. She didn't know that trust could be the thing that kills you. When she came home from school that Wednesday, nothing looked wrong. The sun was warm, the air smelled like spring, and her father would be back in a few hours. She changed her clothes, poured her iced milk, and sat on the couch watching cartoons. Somewhere beneath her feet in the apartment below, a man sat in silence, listening through the ceiling to the sound of her footsteps. She didn't know he was waiting. She didn't know that his plans had finally found a target. Her. Her mug sat half empty on the table. Her dog barked once, as if sensing something invisible. Then everything went quiet, and that quiet would echo through the whole town by nightfall. Some people say parents should never leave their kids alone at home, even for a few hours. Others say independence teaches strength. Curtis believed in his daughter's strength. But how strong can a child be when danger wears a friendly face? Downstairs from Jaime's bright little world was a man almost no one noticed. His name was Kevin Underwood, and everything about him was the color of dust. He was 26, heavy-set, quiet, and worked as a shelf stocker at a grocery store in Oklahoma City. Every day looked the same. Clock in, move boxes, clock out, drive home, heat something from a can, play computer games until morning. To most of the neighbors at the Purcell Park apartments, he was just that quiet guy who keeps to himself. Kevin's apartment smelled faintly of old food and carpet cleaner. The curtains were always drawn, turning daylight into the pale yellow of a hospital hallway. He didn't like sunlight. He didn't like people either. He didn't even talk much to the cashier when he bought his groceries. Loneliness had settled in his life like dust on furniture, thick, familiar, and hard to remove. He had a blog on the internet where he wrote small thoughts that didn't seem to matter to anyone but him. He wrote about being bored, about video games, about not having friends. Sometimes he wrote about darker things, like death and hunger. In one post, he joked about cannibalism, asked what people would wear to dinner if they were cannibals. "The skin of last night's main course," he wrote, adding a smiley face at the end. Most people who read it probably laughed, scrolled past, and forgot. Years later, people would read that same line and wonder, was it a joke or a warning no one took seriously? Kevin's mother remembered him as a happy child once, but somewhere between childhood and adulthood, something turned off inside him. His laughter disappeared. His eyes lost the light that tells people, "I'm still here." Depression came quietly, and he didn't fight it. He lived like a shadow, blending into the background of every place he entered. His apartment held only the simplest things: a mattress, a chair, a small table, a computer, and a rat named Freya. The rat was the only living thing he spoke to. She was white, soft, and calm, something he could control, something that couldn't leave. On the surface, his home looked like any bachelor's space, until you noticed the tools. A hacksaw leaned behind the bathroom door. Rolls of duct tape sat stacked by the sink. A plastic storage tub rested in the closet. A dagger hung from a nail above his bed, next to a few barbecue skewers still in their packaging. Nothing about these things seemed strange by themselves. A man might have them for repairs, cooking, or hobbies. But together, in one small room, they were pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. He had been collecting them quietly for weeks. Each item purchased separately, so no one would notice. He paid in cash. He told himself they were only for just in case. But even he couldn't explain what case he meant. His blog kept filling up with odd entries, half-thoughts about faith, anger, and feeling empty. Sometimes he talked about wanting to feel something, anything. It didn't matter if it was pain or fear or power. That was the dangerous part. When someone stops feeling normal emotions, they start hunting for stronger ones. People saw Kevin every day and never saw him at all. He smiled when the mailman waved. He nodded at the manager. He was polite in the elevator. Every hello was a mask. Behind it, his mind was building something, a plan, step by step, like stacking boxes on a shelf. How many items does it take to turn an apartment into a plan? A hacksaw, duct tape, a dagger, a tub. A fantasy too dark to say out loud. At first, Kevin didn't know who the victim would be. He watched the children who played outside his window, not as a neighbor, but as someone studying possibilities. He noticed who was alone, who came home early, who was small enough to carry. There was a boy, only 5 years old, who used to ride his bike past Kevin's door. He was happy, fearless, sometimes stopped to say hi. For a while, Kevin thought about him. Then he changed his mind. He almost chose the boy, almost. And just like that, without the boy ever knowing, fate turned upstairs instead. The morning of April 12, 2006, rose clean and ordinary over Purcell, Oklahoma. The kind of day no one remembers until it's too late to forget. The sky was pale blue, the air soft and warm, and spring smelled like promise. People woke up believing it would be another simple Wednesday. At 7:30 a.m., Jaime poured cereal into her favorite bowl and added just the right amount of sugar. She was already humming to herself, her backpack by the door, her shoes mismatched as usual. Her father kissed the top of her head and left for work, trusting her to finish getting ready. She always did. At 8 a.m., she caught the school bus. The same seat, the same friends, the same stories told in giggles that meant nothing but joy. She didn't know she was already living the last routine of her life. At 3:15 p.m., the final bell rang. Jaime left school with her friend, stopping by the library for a bit. She stayed there long enough to laugh, to read, to be exactly 10 years old. When her friend's parents arrived, Jaime said goodbye. She started the short walk home, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her thoughts already on the iced milk waiting in the fridge. At 3:45 p.m., she pushed open the door to the apartment, dropped her bag, and kicked off her shoes. She changed into a blue shirt and jeans, poured the milk, and stirred the ice until it clinked against the glass. The dog wagged its tail, waiting to be taken outside. She promised him, "Just a minute." Downstairs, in apartment 115, Kevin Underwood sat in silence. His alarm clock hadn't been touched all day. He hadn't gone to work. He had already decided that this would not be another ordinary Wednesday. The items he had been gathering were ready. The duct tape, the dagger, the storage tub hidden in the closet, the cutting board resting on the counter like a weapon pretending to be a kitchen tool. Outside, children's laughter drifted through the courtyard. Kevin opened his door slightly, watching them play. Then he saw her, the little girl with the bright eyes and the easy trust, the one who lived upstairs, Jaime. At 3:55 p.m., she turned toward her father's car space, expecting him to arrive later. Kevin called out softly from his doorway, a simple invitation. "Want to see Freya again?" That was all it took. She smiled. She remembered the rat, the one she liked to pet. She stepped through his door without hesitation. It clicked shut behind her. He turned on SpongeBob SquarePants, letting the cartoon fill the silence with fake laughter. The glow from the television painted her small face in yellow light. She sat cross-legged on the floor, watching Freya scurry across Kevin's hands. The rat's whiskers twitched against her palm. Kevin stood behind her, breathing heavy and shallow. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the wooden cutting board. It was heavier than he thought it would be. The first strike didn't work. She screamed, not in confusion but in pain, and turned to face him. The world must have tilted for her in that moment, seeing the face of the man she had trusted twist into something monstrous. She begged him to stop, apologizing again and again for things she hadn't done. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry." He struck again and again, but her body refused to give up. Her will to live was stronger than his plan. She tried to crawl away, to reach the door, to breathe through her tears. Then his hands covered her mouth and nose. 15 minutes is longer than you think. It's longer than a commercial break, longer than a song, longer than any child should have to fight for air. Her hands clawed at his arms, Her small fingernails left red scratches that investigators would later photograph and keep forever. But her strength faded, one breath at a time. When it was over, silence filled the room again, the kind that hums louder than sound. The cartoon kept playing, cheerful and cruel, the rat hid in its cage. Upstairs, the dog barked once, waiting for the walk that would never come. And in apartment 115, Kevin Underwood stood in the glow of the television, holding a wooden cutting board that had just changed both of their lives forever. What came next wasn't fast. It wasn't the sudden flash of violence you see in movies. It was long, messy, and awful in a way that didn't make sense, even to him. When the girl stopped moving, the world didn't suddenly go quiet. The TV was still playing. The rat was still moving. The air was still thick with the smell of milk and sweat. Kevin Underwood had imagined this moment for months, maybe years. He thought it would make him feel powerful. But standing there now, breathing hard over the body of a 10-year-old, all he felt was bored. He looked down at her face, waiting for the rush that never came. The fantasy had promised excitement. It had whispered that he'd finally feel something, anything. After all the empty days and silent nights. Instead, he felt heavy and stupid, like a man who built a bomb and forgot what button to press. His chest hurt, but not from guilt. It was from confusion. He dragged her to the bathroom, muttering nothing, not even a prayer. He had imagined it all so neatly in his head. The tub would hold the body. The cuts would be clean. He would take his time and control every part of it. But real life was not like the movies or the nightmares. There was blood, more than he had expected, less than he deserved. He used the dagger he bought for show, tried to follow the script his fantasy had written for him. The blade slipped. His hand shook. He realized then that he was not a god, not a beast, just a pathetic man with no idea what to do now. He told himself this was all for curiosity. He wanted to know what death looked like, what it tasted like, what power felt like when it stopped pretending to be human. He had planned to eat her. He had written about it, dreamed about it. But standing there with the body in front of him, the idea of taste turned his stomach. The fantasy cracked and fell apart like glass under his own weight. He stopped. Not because mercy found him, but because disgust did. He realized he wasn't the dark genius his blog made him out to be. He wasn't special. He was a loser with a dagger and a dead child on his floor. So he cleaned. That's what he did next. He mopped, wiped, rearranged, taped, and covered until the apartment looked almost normal again, as if normal could ever live there now. He wrapped the body in plastic. He lifted it, surprised again by the weight of reality. He placed it inside a large plastic storage tub, the one he had bought weeks ago at Walmart, the one he told himself was for extra clothes. He wrapped the edges with duct tape, layer after layer, until the box looked like a sealed secret. Then he hid everything that didn't fit. The purple bicycle she rode sometimes, taken apart, piece by piece, stuffed into corners of the closet. The mug of iced milk she had left upstairs, now tucked under his bed, as if moving it could erase the memory. Every item that had once been hers was swallowed by his world of gray and silence. And after all of that, after the weight, the smell, the sound, he sat down at his computer, the same desk where he had typed his jokes about cannibals, the same keyboard that knew his loneliness better than anyone else ever did. He turned it on, logged in. He opened a chat window, and then, like nothing had happened, like no one was missing, like he hadn't just stolen the world from a father upstairs, he began to talk to someone online. Casual words, small jokes, emojis. He even smiled. Some monsters roar, others type. Evening came to Purcell the way it always did, with porch lights flickering on and dinner smells spilling into the air. The neighborhood looked peaceful, too peaceful for what was about to unfold. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, Jaime's father, Curtis, was already pulling into the parking lot, tired, but ready to see his daughter. He carried a grocery bag with her favorite snack, maybe thinking about that Easter weekend they had been planning. But when he opened the door, the apartment was quiet. The dog was still inside, whining softly. The television was off. Jaime's shoes were by the door, her backpack against the wall. A glass sat on the table, milk half melted, ice floating like tiny ghosts. At first he thought maybe she was with a neighbor, or maybe outside with her friends. The kind of small thought that keeps panic away. Just for a moment. Minutes turned into an hour. The sun sank. The silence grew teeth. He called her name out into the parking lot. He checked the playground, the library, the sidewalks. No answer. The dog barked again, pacing by the door. By 8 p.m., the search had begun. Neighbors came out with flashlights and shouted her name into the night. The apartment manager walked door to door, knocking, asking, "Have you seen the little girl from upstairs?" Most people shook their heads, worried but hopeful. It was a small town. Kids got lost sometimes. They always turned up. Always. When the manager reached apartment 115, Kevin answered the door. He looked calm, almost helpful. His shirt was clean, his voice steady. He smiled when he spoke, but it wasn't the kind of smile people give when they care. It was the kind that hides. "She was heading toward the library," he said softly. "That's the last time I saw her." It sounded believable. The library was nearby, and Jaime loved it there. But something about his tone stuck in the air too long. It was polite. Almost too polite. As if he had practiced it in the mirror. Every "yes" he said sounded helpful. It also sounded rehearsed. The manager nodded and moved on. Kevin closed his door and went back inside, heart steady, hands still. Upstairs, the father stood in his doorway, scanning the dark parking lot, waiting for flashing headlights that never came. By 10 p.m., the police were called. Officers arrived, calm but alert, taking notes, asking questions. They checked nearby alleys, the schoolyard, the park, even the dumpsters, because they had to. The entire town began to hum with unease. Strangers who hadn't spoken in years suddenly stood side by side, calling out the same name. From Kevin's window, the searchlights flickered against his blinds. He watched them move back and forth like ghosts looking for a door. His face didn't change. Inside the closet, beneath a layer of duct tape and plastic, the truth was waiting, silent and close enough for him to hear. The search spread further, block by block. Helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers brought dogs. Reporters gathered near the street. Purcell had never seen this much noise, this much fear. But no one thought to look downstairs. The girl everyone was searching for was no longer in the world they were searching through. By midnight, the searchers passed through the building again. They walked the hallway, one floor above the closet where she lay. They were just feet away. And the man who had killed her stood behind his locked door, nodding politely as officers walked past, pretending to help, pretending to care, pretending to be just another worried neighbor. The world above was shouting her name. The world below was keeping its secret. By sunrise, Purcell was no longer a small town. It had become a map of fear, covered in tape, posters, and hope that was already wearing thin. The local radio stations had interrupted their morning music for something far heavier. The words "Amber Alert" cut through every kitchen, every truck cab, every breakfast table. The voice on the air said, 10-year-old girl, last seen near her home, wearing blue jeans and a pink shirt. The message repeated every half hour, like a prayer the town kept whispering to God and to itself. Volunteers poured in from nearby counties. Strangers showed up with coffee, flashlights, and tired eyes. They fanned out through fields and woods, forming long lines that looked like scars across the land. Men on horseback, teenagers with cell phones, mothers holding photos, everyone searching, everyone praying not to be the one who found what they feared to find. Police cars parked on Highway 24. Lights flashing against the gray morning sky. The FBI had arrived now, quiet but focused, taking over with the kind of precision that says we've seen this before and we wish we hadn't. They set up a command post near the local church, using the fellowship hall as their base. Maps were pinned to walls. Red markers circled the apartment complex again and again. News vans began to roll in, antennae rising like steel weeds. Reporters rehearsed their sad faces. Cameras panned across the playground, across the empty swings that creaked in the wind. The story was growing faster than the search could keep up. Every door was questioned. Every neighbor was asked. Kevin was asked again, too. He gave the same answer, calm, steady, careful. She went toward the library. He said it the same way each time, word for word, and each time it sounded just a little too perfect. The radio kept playing the same message. Authorities are searching for 10-year-old Jamie Bolin, last seen Wednesday afternoon near her home in Purcell. The sound of her name became unbearable, too alive for someone already gone. Meanwhile, the FBI and state police made a choice no one expected. They built a roadblock at the edge of town. It was supposed to be routine, just to check vehicles, see if anyone had noticed something strange. But in a place like Purcell, where everyone knew everyone, even a simple checkpoint felt like a thunderstorm. Who decides to build a roadblock in a town that small? And why did it matter so much now? Cars lined up along the highway, their drivers showing IDs and answering the same soft questions. Some looked annoyed, others scared. Behind the calm faces of the officers, something sharper was moving. A theory, a feeling, a trace of suspicion they couldn't quite name yet. Then at 3:45 p.m., one of the cars rolled to a stop. Inside sat a father and his son, both quiet, both cooperative. It was just another vehicle among hundreds. Nothing about it screamed importance. But when the officer leaned closer, something in his gut told him to remember this one, this simple truck, this small moment. Because hours later, when the pieces finally started to connect, that truck would become the thread that pulled the whole horror open. And while the volunteers were still combing fields and shouting her name into the wind, the truth was already rumbling quietly down Highway 24, inside a truck that shouldn't have mattered, driven by two men who didn't yet know they were about to change everything. FBI agent Craig Overby had worked too many missing child cases to believe in luck, but sometimes luck still looked him in the face and refused to explain itself. It was mid-afternoon on April 14th, and the Oklahoma sun was sharp and colorless over Highway 24. The checkpoint was ordinary, just a row of orange cones, a few officers waving cars down, and flyers with a smiling girl's photo. Then came the old pickup truck, two men inside, the father driving, the son sitting quietly in the passenger seat. Overby leaned into the window, his badge catching the sun. "Afternoon, sir. We're stopping everyone in connection with the missing child." The older man nodded politely. "Yeah, my boy lives in those apartments where that little girl went missing." Overby's pen froze above his notebook. "Your boy lives there?" The man nodded toward the passenger seat. "That's him, Kevin Underwood." That name meant nothing yet. Not until Overby turned to look at the passenger, a heavy-set man in his 20s with a calm face that didn't match the heat or the situation. His eyes were pale, his voice soft. "Yeah," Kevin said. "I knew her. Jaime. She lived upstairs. I probably saw her last. She went toward the library." It wasn't the words that bothered Overby. It was the tone. Flat. Empty, like someone reading instructions instead of remembering a moment. And then Kevin smiled, almost apologetically, and said the strangest thing Overby had heard all day. "You should have questioned me sooner. I'm single, a loner, been hanging around outside lately." Overby didn't write that down right away. He just looked at him, really looked at him. That kind of volunteered suspicion didn't happen in real life, not from the innocent. He thanked them both as if it was nothing, then asked, "Would you mind coming down to the station to help fill in a few details?" Kevin agreed too easily, too quickly. No protest, no hesitation. The father even looked relieved. "He'll help however you need," he said, not knowing those words would be the last ordinary thing he'd ever say about his son. At the small-town station, Kevin sat across from Overby in a quiet interview room. No handcuffs, no threats, just a table, a notebook, and the hum of the air conditioner. Kevin said he wasn't under arrest. He knew his rights. He just wanted to help. He told his story the same way again, about the pet rat, the pizza phone call, the last time he saw Jaime walking toward the library. His voice stayed steady, emotionless. He blinked, but never fidgeted. Overby noted everything, the missing blink when talking about her, the overuse of details, the way every answer landed perfectly, too perfectly. When the questions slowed, Overby asked casually, "Would you mind if we take a look at your place? Just to rule you out, it'll help us focus elsewhere." Kevin nodded. "Sure, I've got nothing to hide." He signed the consent form. Clear, legal, voluntary. No tricks, no pressure. A signature that would later carry the weight of an entire murder case. Back at apartment 115, Kevin unlocked his door and stepped aside like a host welcoming guests. The air inside was stale. The blinds were closed. A faint smell of bleach floated just above the carpet. Overby walked through slowly, notebook open. The place looked dull. Empty shelves, a TV, a computer, a rat cage. Nothing screamed monster. Then he saw the closet. A large plastic storage tub sat inside, wrapped tight in thick gray duct tape. Too much tape for anything normal. Overby tapped the lid. "What's in here?" Kevin's answer came quick, smooth, almost cheerful. "Comic books. I sealed them to keep moisture out." Overby crouched. His fingers brushed the edge of the tape. He hesitated, then started to peel it away. The first strip came off with a long rip. The second one stuck to his glove. And beneath the third, something blue, a flash of cloth. A color that matched the one on the missing poster taped to his own notebook. Overby looked up at Kevin. Kevin's face cracked like glass. "Go ahead and arrest me," he whispered. "She's in there." And as the silence swallowed the room, the tub that was supposed to hold comic books became a coffin. The sound of tape peeling is ordinary, dull, sticky, harmless. But in that tiny apartment, it became a countdown. Agent Craig Overby knelt on the floor, pulling at the duct tape strip by strip, each rip louder than the last. Around him, the other agents watched in stillness, the kind that fills the air before a thunderclap. The first strip came loose easily, nothing. Just gray tape curling at the edges. The second strip tore slower, dragging against the plastic like a scream that didn't want to come out. Still nothing. Then the third strip. Overby's hand hesitated before pulling. The glue snapped free. And under the lifted corner of the lid, something caught the light. A blue fabric. Small, faded, familiar. It was the color on every poster in town. The color on every TV screen. The color everyone was praying to see again somewhere else. Overby didn't even have to lift the lid higher. He already knew. But before the silence could turn to words, Kevin spoke, his voice flat, fast, spilling out like something that had been waiting too long to be heard. "Go ahead and arrest me." The agents froze. Kevin's eyes darted between them, his breathing picking up. "She's in there," he said. "I hit her. I chopped her up. I'm going to burn in hell." No one moved for a full 3 seconds, not even Overby. The hum of the fridge was suddenly too loud. The sound of Kevin's breath filled the room. Then Overby gave a small nod, signaling the others. The lid came off. Inside the tub was plastic wrap, layers of it, clear, shiny, suffocating. Beneath that, the unmistakable shape of a small body curled in on itself, surrounded by clothes and duct tape. The blue shirt folded against pale skin. No words came out of anyone's mouth. Not even the kind agents are trained to use in moments like this. Overby's hand went to his radio. "We've found her," he said quietly. We've found the girl." The room locked into stillness. Everything that came next moved in slow motion. Kevin's arms were pulled behind him. The handcuffs clicked shut. His body tensed, then sagged. He didn't resist. He didn't plead. He just whispered the same line over and over. Voice shaking now. "I'm going to burn in hell." Outside, the apartment complex was already filling with police lights. Neighbors peered through windows, some crying, some praying. Upstairs, Curtis Bolin watched from his doorway as the swarm of agents gathered below. He didn't know yet what they had found, but he saw Kevin, the quiet man from downstairs, being led out, eyes glassy, mouth trembling. That was the moment the air left Purcell for good. Inside the apartment, Overby stood staring at the tub. His pen was still in his hand, but he had stopped writing. For a man who had seen too much already, this moment felt different, heavier, sharper, personal. He looked at the blue shirt one more time, then at the man sitting handcuffed in the corner. There was no more noise, no questions. Just the kind of silence that doesn't end, the kind that sits with you even when you leave. At the station, Kevin sat under a harsh ceiling light that made his skin look even paler. The camera in the corner blinked red, recording everything. He had already been read his rights. He said he understood. He even signed the paper that said so. There was no shouting, no pressure, no tricks. Just Kevin, a table, a microphone, and the truth he could no longer hide. What spilled out over the next few hours wasn't just a confession. It was a window into a mind that had been rotting quietly for years. The agents didn't have to push. The words came out on their own, one after another, like a script already written. He said it started with curiosity. Then it became fantasy. He spoke about spending months imagining what it would be like. The power, the taste, the control. He had written about it online, joked about it, let it fester. Then he began to plan. He listed the items: hacksaw, meat tenderizer, barbecue skewers, duct tape, plastic wrap, storage tub. He didn't buy them all at once. That would have looked suspicious. He spread the purchases out, hiding his purpose behind small talk and store receipts. Each item had a role. Each had a reason. He had rehearsed the sequence of the crime in his head for weeks. He wanted it perfect. He even picked the location, his own bathroom, and thought about where to hang the body afterward, how to drain the blood, how to keep the head. And then he said something that made the agents pause. "I didn't stop because I realized it was wrong," he muttered. "I stopped because it was too disgusting." The line hung in the air like a bad smell. He admitted that after killing Jaime, he had tried to follow through with the rest of his fantasy, the part where he cooked and tasted her flesh, but couldn't. He said he felt sick. He said the smell ruined it. But to the investigators, the question wasn't whether he had done it. It was that he had wanted to. He had planned to. He had prepared for it. The browser history on his computer told the same story: searches for cannibal recipes, human anatomy, how to commit murder and get away with it. The blog posts matched, too. Dark jokes about eating people, about loneliness, about emptiness. Everything aligned. Every key pressed on his keyboard had been a breadcrumb leading here. When the autopsy came, it was clinical, not emotional. The medical examiner described what happened in terms that stripped away all drama and left only the truth. Jamie Rose Bolin had died of asphyxiation, 15 to 20 minutes of suffocation. She had also suffered blunt force trauma to the head, the cutting board. The injuries were defensive. She had fought. Her hands showed bruises. Her nails had bits of skin under them, his. The cut on her neck was deep but incomplete. The examiner spoke quietly when they confirmed the rest. She had been sexually assaulted. The science made it official. The fantasy made it unforgivable. The court and the media would later ask the same question the agents asked that night. A question that doesn't really have a right answer. If he wanted to be a cannibal, but stopped because he was disgusted, Does the intent still define the crime? Is the act itself the evil or the thought that planned it? Comment spark, number 2. If someone plans something monstrous but quits halfway out of disgust, does that mean remorse or just weakness? By February 2008, almost 2 years had passed since the night Purcell stopped breathing. The courtroom in Cleveland County was full. Reporters, police officers, parents, strangers who had followed the story from the start. They called it the Kevin Underwood trial, but to the people sitting in the front row, to Jaime's family, it was something else entirely. It was the last chance to hear her name spoken in pursuit of justice. The prosecution didn't waste time. They didn't need to. Their story was solid, their evidence overwhelming, and their star witness was Kevin himself, through his own voice, captured on that blinking red camera. They played the confession tape. The lights dimmed, and Kevin's voice filled the room. Flat, empty, without emotion. The same tone he had used to talk about comic books or grocery lists, now describing the death of a 10-year-old. People turned away. Some cried quietly. Even the court stenographer paused her typing once, her fingers frozen mid-air. The prosecutors built their spine of evidence piece by piece. Planning, the lists, the purchases, the timeline. Vulnerability, a small child, home alone, trusting the wrong neighbor. Confession, every word matching the physical evidence exactly. They didn't need to shout or dramatize. The facts were enough. The jury sat still, listening to a man narrate the unthinkable as if it were a to-do list. Then came the defense, led by Matthew Hare. They faced an impossible task, to defend a man who had already confessed, who had already been proven guilty, and whose crime had sickened an entire state. So they didn't argue innocence. They didn't call witnesses. They didn't even try to poke holes in the evidence. Their strategy was quiet and desperate. Save everything for later, for the penalty phase, when maybe, somehow, they could convince 12 people to spare his life. For now, their only argument was that Kevin was sick, not evil. That his mind was broken long before he broke the world around him. But no one wanted to hear about his depression, his autism, or his loneliness. The jury's faces were made of stone. The prosecutor, Tim Kuykendall, stood before them one last time and said what everyone already knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was a man who planned to kill, prepared to kill, and did kill. Then he played the final minute of the confession again. Kevin's voice, flat as before, saying, "I wish I hadn't did it." The room stayed silent for a long time after that. When the jury left to deliberate, no one even got up to stretch. The family sat still, staring at the empty space where justice was supposed to live. They didn't have to wait long. 23 minutes later, the jury returned. No questions, no notes, no hesitation. The foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Kevin Ray Underwood, guilty of first-degree murder." The words landed like the closing of a steel door. But it wasn't over yet. Because the question now wasn't whether he did it. It was whether he should live long enough to regret it. The courtroom changed in tone once the verdict was read. The guilt phase was over, but the real fight had just begun. The penalty phase, where Kevin Underwood's life now hung between two words: life or death. The same 12 jurors who had needed only 23 minutes to condemn his actions would now decide whether to condemn him entirely. The prosecution returned first, calm and surgical. Their task was to prove one simple aggravating factor: that the murder of Jamie Rose Bolin was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. 3 words the law used to describe the worst of the worst. They built their case not through emotion, but through time. They replayed the timeline of suffering, the 15 minutes of suffocation, the multiple blows, the terrified cries of, "I'm sorry," the deliberate planning of every item used. The medical examiner's testimony became unbearable again. Each moment of pain was evidence. Every second she fought for breath became another reason why mercy didn't belong here. Then came the victim impact statements. Jaime's father, Curtis Bolin, spoke quietly, voice shaking but clear. He talked about the laughter that used to fill their apartment, about the checkers board he still couldn't bring himself to touch, about the sound of silence that replaced it. Jaime's mother, Jennifer Fox, told the court that no parent should have to outlive their child, especially not like this. Her sister, Lori Pate, stared directly at Kevin when she said, "You took her joy but not her memory." The courtroom couldn't breathe. Even the jurors looked down. Then the defense rose, the last barrier between Kevin and the needle. Their case wasn't about innocence. It was about reason. They brought in mental health experts, each trying to paint Kevin not as a monster, but as a man trapped inside his own sickness. One called it schizotypal personality disorder, the disorder of the isolated mind. Another called it paraphilia, a dangerous obsession that distorts desire. Later, another expert disagreed with both, diagnosing autism spectrum disorder, saying Kevin's brain worked differently from the start, that he processed empathy like static, that he understood rules but not feelings. The prosecution's expert shot that down. He agreed Kevin was mentally ill but not insane. He knew right from wrong. He planned the crime, covered it up, lied about it. "You can't excuse evil," he said, just because it was lonely. For hours, science battled morality inside the same wooden walls. Finally, the judge gave the jurors their instructions: weigh the suffering, the intent, the mental illness, and decide, not whether he could die, but whether he should. They left the room. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. 8 hours later, the door opened. The foreman's face told the answer before his mouth did. The jury had reached a decision. They found the murder was indeed heinous, atrocious, and cruel. They believed Jaime suffered, and that Kevin planned every second of it. But in an unusual twist, they rejected the claim that he was a continuing threat, meaning they didn't think he'd kill again if kept alive. It was a paradox only the law could create. A man who might never harm again, but who had done something too horrific to forgive. When the verdict was read, death by lethal injection, the room didn't erupt or cheer. It just went still. Kevin showed no reaction, not even a blink. The judge set the execution date for April 3, 2008, but this verdict wouldn't end there. It would ricochet for 16 years, bouncing between appeals, protests, psychiatrists, and headlines, until it came back to the same place it started, a small town in Oklahoma, and a girl whose laughter never came home. After the gavel fell in 2008, Kevin Underwood vanished into the machine, the long gray tunnel of America's death row. His name stopped appearing on news tickers. The cameras left Purcell. The world moved on. But the court system never forgets its paperwork, and Kevin's case was far from finished. The appeals began almost immediately. His lawyer, Matthew Hare, filed notice with the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, OKCCA, the first rung on the ladder. He argued the confession should have been thrown out, that the jury was too inflamed by emotion, that executing someone with autism and mental illness violated the Eighth Amendment. It took years, but in 2011, the OKCCA issued its opinion. Conviction affirmed, sentence affirmed. The next step was state post-conviction relief, a second chance to argue the same points in a different language. Kevin's team claimed ineffective counsel, claimed Hare had failed to call witnesses during the guilt phase, claimed the process itself had been broken. The state court denied it too. Competent, reasonable, lawful. Then came the federal courts. The defense filed a habeas corpus petition, the ancient legal cry that means, "You have my body, but not my soul." The U.S. District Court for the Western District of Oklahoma reviewed the file. They saw the same facts, the same confession, the same blue shirt in that same tub, and they denied relief again. Kevin appealed to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal court just one level below the Supreme Court. The judges read every page. They agreed with everything below them. Kevin's trial had been fair, the evidence overwhelming, his condition tragic, but not exculpatory. By 2018, his last stop was the United States Supreme Court. His attorneys filed for certiorari, the final plea to have the case heard by the highest court in the land. The request was denied without comment. A single line on a page sealed it. Petition denied. For most inmates, that would have meant the countdown begins, but fate paused. In 2014, Oklahoma's death penalty system broke down after a botched execution made international headlines. The state halted all lethal injections to review its protocol, the drug mix, the IV process, the chain of custody. Executions stopped completely. Kevin remained on death row in McAllister, locked in a concrete cell, surrounded by others waiting in the same purgatory. The years blurred together. Breakfast, silence, count, lights out. He wrote letters, he read comic books, he marked birthdays he didn't celebrate. For nearly 6 years, Oklahoma didn't kill anyone. The state called it a moratorium. But the clock never stopped. It only waited. And when the system restarted in 2020, it came back hungry. The new calendar of death was drafted line by line, and Kevin's name was there, printed in ink darker than blood. The next time Oklahoma opened its execution schedule, the date would fall with surgical cruelty, right through the holiday season. Because when executions resumed, the calendar would cut deeper than a knife. When Oklahoma pressed play again on death, it didn't do it quietly. In 2020, the state announced that its new execution protocol was ready. Same drugs, tighter rules, colder tone. The machinery of justice started groaning back to life, one steel gear at a time. By July 2022, the Attorney General filed a sweeping motion. Execution dates for 25 inmates, one of the largest waves in modern American history. It was efficiency disguised as justice, a calendar of endings. Kevin Underwood's name sat quietly in the middle of that list. His date, December 7, 2023. 17 years after Jaime's murder, but bureaucracy moves like a clock with missing teeth. New leadership came. The next Attorney General argued that killing a man every 30 days was too much strain on staff. The state adjusted, spacing executions 60 days apart. Each postponement shuffled Kevin's date further down the list. Every delay stretched the silence just a little longer, like time teasing him with mercy it didn't mean. Then, in October 2024, a new death warrant arrived on his file. The date was December 19, 2024, his 45th birthday, 6 days before Christmas. The symmetry was cruel enough to feel deliberate, even if it wasn't. Kevin himself called it a needlessly cruel act. Not because he feared dying, but because it would make his mother live through that date forever. As the day approached, his lawyers made one last move: clemency. A final plea before the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board, which would vote whether to recommend mercy to the governor. The hearing was held on December 13, 2024. It was short, cold, and final. Kevin's attorney spoke first, pointing again to his autism diagnosis, his untreated mental illness, his remorse. He argued that Kevin had accepted his guilt long ago, that death wasn't justice, it was repetition. Kevin's mother, Connie, pleaded for her son's life. She didn't deny what he'd done. She only asked that he be allowed to die naturally, behind bars instead of by a needle. Then came Jaime's family. Her sister, Lori Pate, faced the board, her voice shaking but sharp. "How dare you ask for clemency?" she said. "You didn't give my sister any. You didn't even let her breathe." The room went silent. When Kevin spoke, his tone was soft, the same dull monotone that had carried him through trial and confession. "I'm sorry for what I did. I hate that I did it. I deserve to die for it." The board didn't deliberate long. The vote was 3-0. Clemency denied. No governor intervention. No appeals left. No miracles waiting. The calendar was set. December 19th, 2024, 10 a.m. Oklahoma State Penitentiary, McAllister. And now, for the first time in 18 years, the clock didn't just count time. It counted seconds. Because soon, there would be only one question left to ask. What do last words sound like when time lands on your birthday? The last 24 hours of Kevin Underwood's life began the same way most of his prison days had, quietly. But this time, every sound carried weight. Every minute had a shadow. Guards spoke in low voices. Papers were double-checked. His name was written one final time on a clipboard that didn't need correction. He was moved from his death row cell to a holding cell next to the execution chamber, the last stop before the end. The air there always felt heavier, as if it already knew. He was given the standard options: a final meal, final letters, final calls. He asked for a plate of simple Oklahoma comfort food: chicken fried steak with gravy, mashed potatoes, pinto beans, a cheeseburger with fries, and a cola. He ate some, not all. The appetite leaves before the body does. They offered him a sedative, Xanax, to calm his nerves. Most inmates refuse it, wanting to stay clear enough to face the needle awake. Kevin accepted, twice. Once that evening, and again before dawn. It dulled the edges of his panic, made the hours float instead of crawl. He wrote letters, to his mother, to old friends, maybe to no one in particular. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he just said goodbye. Those who read them later said his handwriting was neat, as if he wanted the words to be the one thing he didn't leave messy. By midnight, the lights in the unit dimmed, and Kevin turned 45. His birthday. The date on his birth certificate now matched the one on his death warrant. Some guards noticed. They said nothing. The clock ticked past 12, marking both the beginning and the end of his last day. Outside the walls, Purcell slept under Christmas lights. Inside, Kevin stared at the ceiling and whispered to no one. Morning arrived too fast. At 9 a.m., word came down the line. The U.S. Supreme Court had denied his final stay. No last-minute miracle, no delay. The order was brief. Application denied. By 9:45, the witnesses had begun to arrive. Reporters, family members, law enforcement, and two groups separated by glass. One to mourn, one to watch justice happen. The curtains were drawn for now, hiding the chamber on the other side. Kevin lay on the gurney, his arms secured, IV lines waiting. He looked toward the closed curtain, where the people he had hurt most would soon appear. In 10 minutes, those curtains would open, and when they did, the world would see what justice looks like when it lands on your birthday. At 10:04 a.m., the curtain slid open with a metallic whisper. The room beyond was divided by glass, one side filled with quiet witnesses, the other with the gurney. Kevin Underwood was already strapped down, IV lines taped to both arms. The fluorescent lights washed the color from his skin. 2 microphones hung above his face, ready to catch his final words. A chaplain stood near his feet, Bible in hand. Behind the glass, the families of Jamie Bolin sat in silence, holding each other's hands as if to keep from shaking. The 3-drug protocol began the way every execution does, quietly, without sound or ceremony. The first chemical, a sedative, crept through the line, followed by a flush of saline. Then the second, a paralytic, froze every muscle in his body. The third drug waited, patient, until the doctor gave the nod. Kevin turned his head slightly toward the glass. His voice was thin, almost weightless. "I'm sorry for what I did. I wish I could take it back. The timing, it's cruel, but I understand." A single tear rolled down his cheek. The witnesses noted it. The warden signaled the start. At 10:10 a.m., his breathing slowed. His lips parted once more, but no sound came out. His chest rose, then fell, then stopped. At 10:14 a.m., the warden announced the time of death. The curtain stayed open for another minute, long enough for the families to see the stillness, to feel the finality that had been promised since 2006. Some cried softly, others just stared, waiting for a feeling that didn't come. Outside the chamber, the December air was bright and cold. Christmas music played faintly on a radio in the hallway. Reporters typed the time into their notes. 10:14 a.m., execution complete. Inside, the gurney was still, and somewhere between the sound of the closing curtain and the echo of footsteps leaving the room, a quiet question lingered, one that no law, no court, and no punishment has ever answered. Closure. What does that word mean in real life? By noon, the press conference was already underway outside the gates of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. The December wind cut through the microphones as reporters leaned forward to catch every word. Justice, they called it. Closure. Finality. All those polished words that are supposed to sound clean when everything else is still bleeding underneath. Jamie Bolin's family released a short statement through tears and exhaustion. They thanked the prosecutors, the investigators, and everyone who never gave up on Jamie. Her father didn't speak long. He just said, "My baby can finally rest." Her sister Lori, who had carried the case through 18 years of hearings and interviews, stood beside him and said quietly, "We waited too long, but justice came. Justice delayed, but never denied." District Attorney Greg Mashburn called the execution a necessary conclusion to a crime that shattered the innocence of an entire community. He told reporters, "This case reminds us that some acts are so cruel, so deliberate, that only the ultimate punishment fits." Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond echoed him, adding that today's outcome was not about vengeance, but accountability. His voice was steady, the kind that politicians use when they're trying to sound like history is listening. But not everyone agreed. Outside the prison gates, a small group of abolition activists held candles and signs that read, "Mercy for the mentally ill and killing the autistic is not justice." They weren't defending what he did. They were questioning what the state had done. To them, executing a man diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and chronic mental illness was not moral strength, but moral blindness. "If we kill the broken," one protester said, "we just prove the system is broken too." Inside Purcell, the two funerals became the mirror image of each other. Jamie's had drawn over 1,000 mourners, teachers, classmates, firefighters, mothers who never met her but couldn't stop thinking about her. The church overflowed. Her pink coffin was surrounded by stuffed animals and flowers. The choir sang "Amazing Grace," and the sound spilled out into the street. Kevin's burial, by contrast, was private. No cameras, no crowd. Just a plain wooden coffin lowered into hard earth under a number instead of a name. The only people there were 2 prison officials, a chaplain, and the wind. 18 years had passed between the door she knocked on and the door that finally closed behind him. The world had moved on, but not evenly. Some found peace. Others only found quieter pain. And when the evening news ended that night, repeating the same words, "Executed at 10:14 a.m. on his 45th birthday," the country turned the page again, ready for the next story. But in Purcell, Oklahoma, where a little girl's laugh once filled a small upstairs apartment, the air still carried that echo, the one that began on the day everything ended. Justice delayed, but never denied. When the lights go out on a story like this, it never really ends. The facts stop, but the questions keep crawling through the cracks, refusing to stay quiet. Because beneath the headlines and verdicts, what really matters is what we decide justice means when it hurts too much to say it out loud. Does the date of an execution matter? If a man dies on his birthday, 6 days before Christmas, is that justice or cruelty with a schedule? Can timing itself turn fairness into vengeance? If intent includes cannibalism, but disgust stops it, does the intent still define the punishment? If you stare into evil and flinch back, does that make you human again, or just a coward who blinked too late? The jury chose death, yet rejected continuing threat. So they believed he would never kill again, but they killed him anyway. Do you agree with punishing the past more than protecting the future? Would life without parole have honored Jaime more or less? Would forcing him to wake up every day with what he did have been worse than letting him drift away quietly on a gurney? These are the questions that don't fit neatly into verdicts or headlines. They're the ones that stay long after the screen fades to black, asking if justice is meant to heal or to remind. And if you've stayed through this entire story, if you've listened, questioned, and felt the weight of every decision made in that courtroom, then you already know this channel isn't for easy answers. It's for people who believe that truth should hurt a little. If you want cases told with every hard detail and no soft cover-ups, you belong here. Subscribe, turn on all notifications, and tell us in the comments, where does justice end and mercy begin?